All right, I'm going to kick us off now. I think we have a critical mass of participants, and it is my absolute pleasure to introduce you all to what I hope will be the first of many Spotlight on Forums. I am Liza Weinstein, one of the three editors of the International Journal of Urban and Regional Research, or IJUR. And 2 to 3 times a year, IJUR publishes online issues of our Spotlight On series, in which we bring IJUR's distinctive critical urban perspective to shine a spotlight on issues of pressing global concern. These original, free-to-access pieces draw on the expertise and insights of established and emerging scholars from different regions of the world. So while these essays address many emergent themes in critical urban studies, they also reflect IJUR's core objectives, which were presented in one of the journal's first editorial statements, published in 1977, in which the editors wrote, "Problems of urban and regional development are of growing visibility on a world scale. In rich and poor, socialist and capitalist countries alike, often they directly derive from processes which operate on an international level. This journal will compare and contrast such problems as they occur in widely differing situations and social systems." The problems we have taken up and looked at in these comparative and contrasting ways uh, usually focus on current issues of pressing concern, such as urban warfare, water scarcity, or refugee resettlement, or of the theoretical frameworks and the bodies of scholarship that have developed to conceptualize these issues. But the problems we have taken up in our latest Spotlight On, which was published earlier this month on IJUR's website, is of a more personal and self-reflexive nature. We have decided, which we felt the time called, for shining a spotlight on the process of doing urban field research and how this process, which we don't discuss even in normal times, has been radically disrupted by the events of the past year. This collection grows directly out of the summer and winter school that IJUR co-organizes with RC21, funded in part by the IJUR Foundation. Every 2 years, coordinators from the RC21 and IJUR organizations put together a roughly 10-day intensive workshop with PhD students from around the world to discuss a range of methodological, conceptual, and epistemological issues, with the intention of creating a supportive environment for doctoral students who are in the midst of or about to begin fieldwork in cities and urban spaces around the world. In September 2019, we gathered at the Institute for Economic Growth at Delhi University with 25 warm, bright, and fierce emerging urban scholars. This was the first summer and winter school that I had the opportunity to coordinate, so others are better positioned to speak with more perspective about how this compared to other experiences. But I was personally struck by the collegiality, the mutual support, and the deep friendships that emerged among the students that felt rare to me in professional settings. These friendships turned out to be even more important than I think we had imagined when we were in Delhi in September, when just a few months after the summer and winter school ended, COVID-19 was discovered and diagnosed, and most aspects of our professional and personal lives, including the PhD research the students were getting ready to do, was put on hold or turned upside down. The students remained in touch on the shared WhatsApp group and supported one another through their research pivots. About a year ago, a few of these students, many of whom are here with me today, reached out with a proposal to write a series of essays that drew on these experiences of the past year to discuss in an open and reflexive way the process of doing research during this time. And the idea for this Spotlight On Forum was born. In the end, 10 of the 25 students, participants in the summer school and winter school, wrote essays outlining their experiences of doing or attempting to do urban studies, qualitative research during a pandemic, and 9 of these scholars are here with us today. Their essays reflect the experiences of doing research in 8 different countries. They reflect the experiences of students whose professional, academic, and personal lives are spread across multiple locations, and as a consequence are intertwined with administrative, legal, geographic contexts in many different locations. And their essays speak about the many ethical, logistical, and personal challenges that arise when we do fieldwork. But these are themes that are usually only discussed with advisors, and even those maybe not as much as they ought to be, and with close peers and colleagues, and rarely get written about on the pages or websites of our professional journals. But using their honest and insightful reflections as a starting point, I hope that we can have more conversations in the future about these hidden aspects of doing urban field research. So that is sort of the totality of the comments I wanted to make to kick us off. And for the remainder of our time together, I want you to hear directly from the authors in this collection, because we have opted for a somewhat unconventional format with many presenters. I'm joined by 9 authors reflecting on their 8 essays. Rather than my giving introductions, we've asked the presenters to introduce themselves. So I'm going to hand the floor first to Gala, who will hand it over to her co-author, Leon.
Thank you, Liza, for your kind words. Hello, everyone. I'm Gala. I'm a third-year PhD student now at Humboldt University in Berlin. I'm doing my PhD in urban sociology. And the project asks how contemporary far-right contestations and politics get negotiated in urban governance processes here in Germany. And I was lucky in the sense that the pandemic didn't shift my PhD topic entirely. And I was even able to conduct some in-person interviews when incidences and cases were low over the summer months last year. And I used the essay, which I wrote together with Leon, to reflect upon 2 interviews and encounters I had in the city I study, which is Cottbus in East Germany. And I wrote and reflected upon these 2 encounters because both respondents kind of actively and politically denied the COVID safety measures that were in place by not wearing a mask in the interview situation itself, and sort of claiming that the COVID measures were part of Angela Merkel's dictatorship, and I guess ethical challenges of how to navigate these situations were the starting point for Leon's and my reflection. And I just hand over to Leon now to say a bit about her the other part of the essay.
Yeah, thanks, Gala, and first of all, also thanks to everyone for making this possible, this discussion, but also all the conversations we had over the last year. It was really valuable for me. So I'm Leon. I'm a PhD student at the Center for Urban Research on Austerity, and my work is on tenants' relations in Leipzig, an East German city. So basically, my PhD explores their changing relationships in the context of urban restructuring since German reunification, which means I look at solidarities, fragmentations, but also authoritarianism and the far right, which is how my work relates to Gala's work as well, and what we explored in our essay. And as I research relationships, of course, the pandemic had a major impact on both my methodology and the subject of my analysis. And I reflected on that in the essay with Gala a bit, as in terms of my methodology, especially talking to people with far-right or authoritarian attitudes. I had a big sampling problem when physical encounters were no longer possible because I didn't have any previous relationships with these people that I could build on to conduct online interviews or something like that. So I tried to explore with creative sampling methods like posting letters, and simultaneously I conducted an online ethnography of emerging mutual help groups, but was confronted with their limited outreach. So I think my changing methodology also very much reflected on on how the subject of my analysis changed and how relationships were very much polarized during the pandemic. And with that, I'll hand it over to Francesca.
Thank you, Leon. So hello, everyone. Thank you to Liza and Ashna for giving us the opportunity to share our research experiences during the pandemic. And I'm very happy to share this space with the wonderful colleagues and friends I had the chance to meet in Delhi. So my name is Francesca. I'm an architect and a urban planner. I'm currently a PhD candidate in regional planning and public policy at the University of Venice. So my doctoral thesis is at the intersection among informality planning theory and post-colonial theory. I researched the co-production of governance and coexistence of formal and informal spatial planning practices and their effect in shaping the materiality of informal settlements in Buenos Aires. So I belong to the group that a researcher that had the opportunity to in some way continue with the planned research, trying to adapt my fieldwork to the pandemic context. However, to get to Argentina from Italy was a huge challenge because of COVID traveling restrictions. But once in Argentina, I tried to find creative and safe strategies to continue fieldwork both virtually and in presence. So basically, firstly, I resorted to local university networks to get access to key informants, institutions, civil society organization rooted in selected territories I wanted to work on. Secondly, I designed a set of different interview methods depending on the actor to be approached. So basically, I've carried out both face-to-face interviews and virtual interviews. But the main critical reason why I could not avoid face-to-face interviews with the inhabitants were that the respondent had almost no access to technology and connectivity. Then thirdly, I decided to use cartographic tools and geographical data for mapping and visualizing and exploring the housing struggles of informal settlement. And then lastly, I introduced a new case study, the land squatting of Guernica, in which I was initially involved as an activist and an urban planner, and then as a researcher. And I decided to introduce this case study because in some way it showed and illustrated the increasing of housing shortage during the pandemic in Argentina. So thank you. And now over to you, Winnie.
Hello, everyone. Sorry. Hello, everyone. My name is Wei Hang. I'm a PhD candidate in Renmin University of China, and my research focuses on effective politics from geographic perspective. Currently, I'm working on my dissertation and trying to explain how city branding program reshape citizens' emotion and affect in urban China. And I began my research in this field since I came back from Delhi, the SA21 summer school in 2018. I focused on the phenomena in Beijing. After I returned back from Delhi, I almost I focus on the phenomena in Beijing. The municipal government closed almost all the stores in Hutong, and the street vendors were driven away from the Hutong and the street because the government regarded the capital city as an international metropolis. But the local residents' feeling and emotion towards the living space has also began to change. But as we all know that as the pandemic broke out, many cities were locked down, and so I also had to stay at home in Puyang. It is my hometown. So when I stay in Puyang, when I walk out, I realized that the urban atmosphere was totally different. Also, such as, for example, when I walked into the market during the pandemic, I found that the interaction between people have changed. So people have fear and anxiety when they interact with others. Before the pandemic, I focused on the formal store in Beijing, but after the pandemic, I focused on the informal market in Puyang. So I can did the comparison between them. I found the difference of the people's emotion towards the physical space and the relational space. So that's the starting point of my research. That's what I want to share with you. So let's move to Taru.
Thank you, Winnie. I wanted to thank everyone again for putting this together and coming together in such difficult times and helping each other through this time. My name is Taru. I am a PhD candidate at University of Michigan. My research has shifted considerably in the period of last year. I technically study procedural planning networks. My research was framed as which was meant to be a planning study of informal networks and food networks across cities of Ranchi and Takoradi, Ghana. And I was going to look at indigenous systems of production, spatiality, and food access. But when the lockdown hit India on March 25th, all markets were shut down very strictly, and there was a sort of a crisis around migrant workers, informal workers, etc., which is the time which I joined grassroots workers in Ranchi, where I was like then sort of stuck because I was doing my field work there, and started working with the grassroots workers there, and then started working with the state control room there. Um, and my research sort of shifted because I was embedded there for a period of 6-7 months. And then when I returned back to the USA, I sort of kept working with them, and I still continue to work with them. And the research moved to how does institutional hybridity, multiple networks coming together, support relief work and sort of crisis management during times of disaster, like the pandemic was, and it was also looking at intersectionality around, why were migrant workers sort of expelled in the city, and why was the crisis the way it happened. So there's been a major shift across the last year's time period in my own research, and I've seen that happen to a lot of people. But I also feel that that in embedding myself in the network and giving myself the time to breathe and do the things I wanted to do in that period of time, um, um, I did what I thought as a person I could do to help, and I think that needs to come first, no matter what, in this period of time. So right now, as you all know, India is going through another crisis, and it's very interesting to see how people have galvanized again around that. So thank you for everyone for all your work. I'll just move to Sarah and let her do her thing.
Thank you, Taru, and thanks, of course, Tatiana, Ashna, and Lisa for putting us together and organizing this event. My name is Sara. I'm coming from Serbia, living in Belgrade, and I'm anthropologist doing my PhD on actually relationship towards housing and urban commons, or the common spaces in large housing estates within, let's say, a neighborhoods built under the socialist Yugoslavia and totally different ideological and urbanist paradigm than we are witnessing today in how the capital of Belgrade is growing. My main focus is actually, even though the New Belgrade and housing on this side of the river have been researched very much in last 5 years since the MoMA exhibition on Yugoslavian architecture, and there has been a growing interest in socialist modernism, as most of you probably know, but most of the research focus has been on actually either demographic data on inhabitants or on, let's say, some architectural or urbanistic features of those developments. But I'm, as an anthropologist and ethnographer, trying to go bottom up and actually research the experience of living and dwelling inside those concrete blocks. One of those is where I'm located right now in Block 45. And that life in these concrete blocks, of course, changed a lot under the lockdown and under the pandemic. And that change of our everydayness requested some changes in my methodological approach that is, let's say, composed out of 3 consecutive steps, first of which are sensory maps of neighborhoods that I use to explore memories of home and actually practices of appropriating open spaces within the neighborhood. The second step would be photo diaries of my informants, and then photo elicitation of those diaries, and finally in-depth interviews and home tours. And I belong to the group of authors in this collection who refuse to make changes in their methodology, as both my advisor, my peers at the institute where I work, and I consider that in-depth, very sensorial and phenomenological methodology the core of my thesis, and actually moving to some more data-oriented approach, Zoom interviews, and actually leaving behind all those sensorial maps and photos and everything else would actually be a different kind of research that I didn't want to do. So I waited, and I was practicing patience to actually negotiate a lot with my neighbors, and then finding respondents, and then waiting for their quarantine to go away, and then waiting for their family members to recover, and waiting for myself to be good and feel good to actually meet with people and conduct research. I was waiting for actually, I don't know how much of a time it took, but let's say it's finally coming to an end, and I'm finally close to finishing my fieldwork, and it lasted, let's say, a year with a lot of refusal, a lot of missed opportunities that I learned a lot from, and I would like to actually speak more about that learning experience and that patience that is sometimes taken for granted, and the trust that is taken for granted when doing research with people, especially under difficult circumstances. With that, I will finish and pass the mic to another stubborn researcher in the same time zone in South Africa. Ali?
Thanks, Sarah. Hi, everyone. My name is Alison, and I'm a PhD candidate at the African Centre for Cities based at the University of Cape Town in South Africa. And I just want to echo what everyone else has said in terms of thanks to Ashna and Liza and Tatiana, the mother of our group, to bring us all together and to push us forward to actually see this through. I know there's an ongoing joke that researchers love talking about their own work. I'm not one of those researchers, so I'm not going to be very long. but my research is broadly focused on urban food insecurity and planning, and more specifically, it looks at the intersection between power planning and food, and whether or not a food-sensitive approach to planning would be possible in Cape Town, given the current planning paradigm that the city undertakes. And for this, I'm using the case of a neighborhood called Langa in my research. And I guess the biggest way in which my research was affected by the pandemic was just not being able to access my field site, like similar to Sarah, for a year due to the strict COVID-19 regulations in South Africa, which really restricted our movement for the year. So I went from having planned my year of field work to having to stop and rethink. And through that, I learned the importance of slowing down when you're doing qualitative research. And I explore this idea of slowing down and taking time in my essay, which is looking at more haste and less speed. And through that slowing down, I realized that while I was able to almost bathe in the luxury of taking time and slowing down, my participants had the complete opposite experience, where they were hustling to survive, to support their families on a daily basis during the pandemic, but also outside of the pandemic. And so through that, it was an extremely humbling experience, and something that I'm going to take with me throughout the rest of my fieldwork, and something that hopefully we can touch on a little bit later during the question time. But like I said, I'm going to keep it brief. And with that, I'm going to pass over to my friend and colleague, Angana.
Hello everyone, I am Angana. First of all, many thanks everyone for making this possible. So I'm doing my PhD in the School of Habitat Studies, Tata Institute of Social Sciences, Mumbai. And my research interest includes the urbanization, urban governance, peri-urbanization, and restructuring of urban places. For my PhD, the broad research interest includes suburban land transformation, the life and the livelihood of the mill workers, and the negotiation and the dynamics associated with this land transformation for a suburban town located in the Indian state West Bengal. So for my case, I came back from the field just doing my pilot on 5th of March, and nationwide lockdown began just after the 9 days, that is 24 March. And it's for undefined days. And due to the worldwide lockdown, I stuck to my home, Mumbai, and my plan for the data collection and stopped. So seeing the continuous extension of nationwide lockdown with several restrictions over traveling, I have to see the possible way about how my research can be done. So therefore, I, with the guidance of my research supervisor, decided to go ahead with what we have currently in our hand. And on that basis, I started analyzing the data which I already had. So I got a chance to hear several important online lectures organized via various groups working on the same place, and thus digital ethnography emerged as a new method for my data collection. Lectures organized via online platforms helped me to understand how the digital technologies produce new possibilities in this tough time. Not only that, available the digital information like newspaper, online local articles, etc. About the field also added an extra advantage during this time. Video calling, text-based instant messaging, and online service emerged as other important technique for data collection. I missed my involvement as a researcher with my field, but the essence of busy, crowded roads and narrow gullies of mill colony, of the transforming lands, and the everyday interaction with the workers, the residents on the small suburban town. But I personally believe the telephonic interviews are extracting information that are lacked with emotion during this tough time. Apart from that, I would like to share that I am a mother of a 4-year-old child, and so work from home emerged as a meat for me. So every day is perceived and performed during this period of working woman is like it's like a roller coaster, and it's very tough for me to manage work and home simultaneously. So I think that my creativity and ability for striving excellence have been challenged, as I believe this spatial separation of workspace and home is extremely important. I think mothers along the world is feeling the same kind of constraints. So the pandemic has not only compelled me to revise my research methodology, but also it produces and reinforces the inequalities in the way men and women scholars contribute to the knowledge production. Traveling with a child in this kind of dense locality, for me, it was not possible. So keeping those points in mind, during this tough time, I focused mainly on the writing aspects and the literature review, and make my research question much stronger, and so that when I can go back to my fieldwork and do as of what I need to be collected and come back. So here is my experience. Now I am sharing now I'm passing to Tatjana for her experience.
Thank you, Angana. Thank you, everybody. I'm so proud that we made it. And I'm so happy to see everybody. I would wish for us to be in the same room, but that's how it is right now. Hi, I'm Tatjana Bozzi. I research local welfare state institutions, new social risks, and active labor market policies in subnational cases in Austria and UK. My interests are in spatial inequality, social policies, and discursive norms in their spatial expressions. The pandemic influenced my research in a phase where I was looking for funding my dissertation, and it stopped my empirical work full. So my essay talks about the struggles of trying, failing, and successfully trying to start my own research project. Along the way, questioning whether or not to proceed with my dissertation at all, while there is a pandemic changing all social conduct. By being confined to my home in the last year gave me some time to help carve out my research, but often spiraled into academic isolation and the feeling of being put on hold and then suddenly having to increase work speed twice. Having a family 500 kilometers away from your university and research field is challenging. Something that hit me hard just last week when my partner and son had a lockdown-related crisis and I had to reschedule interviews immediately to take care of my family in Tyrol. I'm now back in Vienna, but it's something that still lingers. So the lockdown and the pandemic still affect my research. In 2020, seeking advice and exchange with peers helped me through the low points, refined my research interest, and renewed my fire for conducting spatial social research. I also found renewed value in my research, not just in an academic realm. I experienced something I'm sure many of us know. I found that my researcher goggles rarely came off. As attuned critical urban researchers, it is and was impossible to miss the different social shifts, the breakdowns, the premieres last year in the spaces around us. Beyond my personal reflection, the pandemic marks a historic point in all societies. For Vienna and Austria, it is hard to miss that the political and public discourses shifted towards polarization, authoritarian tendencies, and racist tones. My research topic now needs to reflect much more on the times in which it is conducted in. The pandemic and its impact influenced the design and implementation of social policies in the short run, but the pandemic's socio-political impact will remain for years to come in every corner of society. And I believe that as critical researchers, we need to address this openly. It is a very challenging and tremendously interesting time we find ourselves in. And I believe that our research can be open and critical about these times that it is conducted in. So I'm really looking forward to the Q&A session, which will be kicked off now by Lisa, and looking forward to all your questions and comments.
Thank you, Tatjana. And thank you to everyone for your openness and your sharing your willingness to put your research, but also your personal experiences sort of out there in the world for providing us a space to have these discussions that I think are really important. One of the themes that has really kind of come up throughout all of your essays is the way, and your comments now, is the ways in which the pandemic exposes inequalities and social dynamics and processes that are relevant in non-pandemic as well as pandemic times. That sort of the brutalities of the past year really kind of lay bare things that we sort of have had the luxury perhaps of avoiding. And that's sort of, you know, many of the questions that I want to be asking you and using as a basis for discussion kind of center on that theme of what has been exposed by the pandemic. And so I'm going to ask a couple of my questions, but intersperse them with questions that the panelists have for one another. I think that we don't, you know, we often have these presentations where we don't get to hear from the panelists posing questions based on their own experiences to one another. So I'm going to ask some questions, the panelists will ask questions, and then we will open it up for discussion, you know, in about 30 minutes or so. So please do post your questions in the Q&A section of the chat. So my first question really is about a theme that came up in several of your presentations and essays about time and temporality. I heard the phrase time to breathe, practicing patience, waiting, patience. I kind of wrote down the word patience every time I heard it in your presentations today. Slowing down. Ali uses, you know, this elegantly beautiful phrase, moving at the speed of trust, in her essay. And I'm curious to hear you speak about, a few of you, to chime in on the question of how what you've learned about time, the time it takes to do research, the time it takes to build those relationships required to understand sort of people's intimate lives and experiences within cities, how you're going to bring those lessons forward, or how they can inform the research that we do during non-pandemic as well as pandemic times. I mean, to what degree can we sort of draw upon this experience? So I'm going to first ask Ali to speak, and then for Sarah to chime in. And if anyone else wants to chime in on this question, I would love to hear your reflections if you have them to offer. So Ali?
Thanks, Liza. Yes, I can't take credit for the moving at the speed of trust phrase. It came through the community action networks that were set up during COVID-19 in Cape Town, and it's something that I learned through my involvement with them. But it is something that I've taken on as a new speed. And in reflecting on time, I'd say that we're so often compelled to get things done and to rush and to just get it over with. And I think it's a sign of the times that we live in, but also, you know, the way that we're pushed as young researchers as well. But there is this need and this generative process that can come through slowing down. And one of the ways was this speed of trust. And in doing that, it's, whether we like to admit it or not, we come in as researchers with a sense of ego and bravado and like an expertise that we know the most in the room or something like that. But to admit and shake off that and start to move in a way that allows for those who know best, often your participants, about what they need in that moment. So this came out of when people were needing aid during COVID. So understanding that and knowing that you're not the one who knows the most appropriate way to move forward, knowing that you're not the expert, that allows you to start moving with this sense of trust that things are going to work out if you kind of hand over the reins and not just believe that you have to control everything. So that's something like giving up that sense of control. But obviously, like I mentioned in my introduction, that slowing down is not something that everyone can do. And it's not really realistic. But in doing it, I think it's really important for qualitative research going forward is that it allows your research ideas and methods to kind of marinate and mature, which allows for a far richer and more generative approach to your research instead of just rushing through the same kind of methods and doing the same kind of field work and data collection. But also, I thought it was necessary to add that slowing down doesn't mean stopping, but just a pause. And it's that pausing, which is where we can start to rethink, and having that space to breathe and rethink, which I think is really important and something that I wouldn't have been allowed to do had it not been for the pandemic. But obviously it does have other repercussions like funding and timeline repercussions, which are quite real as well. Yeah, but if anyone is ever given the opportunity, I would highly recommend scheduling in your slow down to rethink. If that responds to what you're asking.
Yeah, thank you, Ali. That's very, very helpful. And Sarah?
Thank you for this question. So again, as I'm coming from anthropology, it is usual for an ethnographic fieldwork to last a year. That's like that unachievable number of months or days at the pace of academic production and demands today. And this year was actually, as Ali said, something that was given to me that I couldn't even hope for in a sense of I would be pushed to work faster, to already be in some other phase of my of writing or processing all the data, interpreting it, and so on. But what that time also brought to me was ability to communicate more with the people I work with. In normal circumstances, they would reach out because they found out about the research on some Facebook group of their estate, or I would reach out through friends, neighbors. I would meet them outside or whatever, and then we would agree on the date of our urban tour, of the interview, of whatever. But in these circumstances, there was much more communication. There was much more checking in, talking in between the sessions, just meeting each other and feeling comfortable around each other under the pandemic, which actually helped me create much closer relationships with my informants or the people I work with, and made them trust me, so that one day that comes a day when I will come into their house, I would not be a complete stranger who will ask questions about, I don't know, illegal renovations or adding balconies that they weren't allowed to and things like that. But we would be something close to a friend, let's say, something more than neighbors, but definitely something more than just a professional researcher, subject of the research relationship would look like. And that was actually one of the good things that this pandemic has brought. I'm completely aware that the whole topic of my research and the angle that I'm aiming, and the fact that the researched estates are middle-class estates and have different kinds of problems, are very out of the world of what's actually going on with the pandemic, especially if we look on the other side of the streets, when there is informal settlement where Belgrade, Roba live, and there is a conflict and a lot of racism. And then I'm actually trying to use that bond that we are creating through time to actually, I cannot say make them speak, but make them comfortable speak about the things they maybe wouldn't be so open to sharing if they would just consider me some, researchers that came there to squeeze out the answers from them, and then she's gone for good.
Thank you for that, Sarah. I want to give anyone else an opportunity who may have contributions that you want to make to this question of time, pace, speed. All right. Well, I am going to, I think it may come up in others' comments. So I'd like to invite Francesca to ask a question to one of the other panelists.
Okay. I would like to ask a question to Taru. So I really liked your essay, and I appreciate both your flexibility and capacity to adapt the research to the new scenario, and also your proposal to consider our roles and our ability to contribute to the society in this crisis, rethinking the role of planners and policy scholars, especially in academia. So I wanted to ask you, how do you dealt with your double role of activist and researcher? Has sometimes it's hard to separate these two spheres and different positionalities.
Thanks, Francesca. It was I'd say a lot of it was serendipitous. Once you go into the field, a lot of things happen. In my case, I sort of got through my networks, and I think that's one of the key things. As scholars, we all have networks in the state control room in Jharkhand. And in that period of time, I mean, the first thing was I was very, very clear that I'm first a PhD scholar. I was also in a very sort of interstitial space between my research, because my previous research had been suspended due to IRB concerns, due to logistical concerns, and my current research had not sort of coalesced such, right? I was in between. So all I said to people was, I'm here to help. I don't know this network the way you do. I don't know the government system the way you do. I will be documenting things to the best of my ability if you give me consent. But mostly I'm here to work. So the idea was that I was a volunteer, and what I did during the period was sort of like just sit and see how things work, join them as a consultant in terms of like asking them where I could help. Initially, they sort of like put me on writing because English was a critical thing. They needed to get money for food, etc. But then once they realized I had other skill sets, they leveraged me there as well. So it was sort of like Ali was saying, coming in with a lot of humility, understanding that there's only so much I can do, but whatever I do could be helpful, and sort of working with the team with that perspective. It was interesting because I had to negotiate, and people were also slightly interesting in the ways that they would say things to me that they would not say to their colleagues, sort of like in ways that, for instance, if they thought something could be done better, they would say it to me specifically, so that they would think that I was outside the power differential somehow. So if I was interviewing or talking to government officers, they would be like, this is how it works here, but you all are from America. So, and I'd be like, I'm not from the US, but okay. And there was this a lot of like couching the discourse a little bit with me. So there was a lot of negotiating that. But generally, I think because I came in with so much of humility, they just sort of decided that it was okay to talk to me. And thinking about time, Liza, it was just that it was so accelerated, and everybody was working and continues to work at such like intense time periods, such deadlines. So the trust was, I think I had trust in a week because they saw me working 18 hours with them, and the idea that somebody would come out during lockdown and risk pandemic, because there's so much fear around it, just instantly got us all like on the same page. So.
Thank you. I'd like to invite Tatiana to ask a question.
Oh, I have so many. I think I have a question for everybody, but maybe I'll ask a question to Winnie. So I was reading your piece, and I really liked your research, and you know that before because you presented it in Delhi. I would like to know if what happened when you shifted your research from Beijing to Pyongyang. So would you do that again? And do you think something opened up when you chose a different space to research compared to the main capital? So can you talk about when you shifted and why you did that and how that affected your research?
I think the first reason is that the lockdown policy, because actually the pandemic broke out in February last year, and I didn't know when I can come back to Beijing. So, but I also should do put forward my research. So then I put my I observed the field in Puyang, and when I work out, I found that the emotion people have the emotion towards the market are totally different from the phenomena before the pandemic. So I think it is the because the difference is dramatic. So I think it really shocked me. So I think I want to get the reason from the peoples in the world, and to get some to get some reasons from the observation. But but when I did the field trip, also the city is locked down at that time, so I only can do my research from the WeChat application. It is the app in our cell phone. So I think it also we can construct a relational space from the through this app. So that's my answer.
Thank you to both of you. I have a question about something that has come up in several of your presentations as well, and that's mentorship and peer support and the kinds of networks that are required to be able to execute the kind of in-depth, thoughtful research that in which you are all engaged. And I'm wondering if a couple of you can speak about who you turned to for advice as you navigated these pivots, and how you, sort of relied upon established networks or maybe built newer, sort of unexpected support networks for yourself as scholars during this time. So I'll ask first Tatiana to speak on this question, and then perhaps Taru can chime in, since this was also a theme in your essay.
Okay, yeah, it was a big thing for me. So established venues or new ones. I mean, I would highlight two groups especially. The first one was suddenly we started to have this remote office. So I started with a couple of PhDs here in Austria, the University of Vienna. We would schedule a time block where we would try to work, to have some focused work and to have some accountability towards each other. So we would meet on some chat platform, some video platform, and say, okay, in the next 50 minutes, I want to do this and that. And then after these 15 minutes, we would meet again and tell each other how it went and if we finished what we were trying to accomplish. So in that way, we would not start scrolling down newspaper articles or Facebook or other social media or whatever. We would be accountable to each other, and we would be quite honest with each other and say, no, I didn't do anything. I just looked through 5 emails and didn't even answer them. So that was, it was a mixture between self-help group and also work group. And the funny thing is that we all agree that we want to keep this going, even digitally, to meet up whenever we think we need to get some writing done. It's very good for writing. Yeah, and we keep doing it. The group grows now, so we have maybe to split it off. And the other thing is a more established venue of a PhD club that we started, and actually Gala and Francesca are part of this. You know, to exchange our research and to do it in a very safe space and to read something together. And this is something that's supported by the Doctoral School of Social Sciences in Vienna here. They try to give us some infrastructure and actually try to give us some rooms, but now it's a hybrid on digital and physical. So I think that the peer support was always is the most valuable support that you get, because you can be quite honest and frank and really say what's on your mind. Whereas with your supervisor, you would be more timid because the roles are quite different. So yeah, and it was very, very helpful during the pandemic.
Yeah, I think that this is an issue that became revealed during pandemic times, but is important and relevant outside as well. Taru, if you could speak briefly on this point.
Yeah, for me, it was so I was geographically very interestingly located because I was in my field and my university is in the United States. My family is still in India, but it's pretty far away at the time. And in the complete lockdown, we couldn't really access any kind of, like, other than phone calls, or Zoom, which we realize have become like a way of being these days. So for me, what was very interesting was when my research got suspended and we all got that email. My advisors, my committee, in fact, all of them reached out to me in various ways, and they were very, very supportive. In the sense that they were like, "So, what are you going to do? Do you want to come back? How do we, you know?" So it was a very sort of a moment of coalescing, saying, "Do what you can. Don't worry. You know, we have your back." And that, I think, was a huge thing for me, because that allowed me to sort of negotiate my position in any way that I wanted to, you know, in the best way I could. And also, like, if I told them that, so I said to my committee that I might just start volunteering and that I'm not doing my research, they were very supportive. So, and then they sort of started talking to IRB on my behalf, in the sense that they reached out to the institution and started talking about, she's doing this embedded work. She's not got her questions. So can she start like just observing? And what would you call as harm in such a situation? And pandemic and harm and embedded work are very, very interesting situations. This was not during the time I started working. This was like 3 months into it, right? So I had worked for 3 months, and my committee was always on my radar. They were talking to me, and they were like, "Okay, so now that you're here, how comfortable are you changing your question?" And I was like, "I don't want to change my question," right? So there was this very huge tussle around the fact that I had done so much literature. I had gotten a certificate in African studies. I was going to go to Ghana to do my research. So there's so much tussle in that first 3 months. But what really got me through was the fact that you all, like, looking at the PhD cohort here, sort of negotiating this thing, looking at my own PhD cohort there, and then looking at researchers in India, a lot of people who were also sort of stuck in lockdown and how they were negotiating. And what came down to me was, this was the time to sort of like just do what you can in the best possible way, help where you can, and like let the time sort of like, because it's a crisis, and I couldn't in that moment like be so strict about my own plan that I forget the amount of suffering around me. So it sort of like helped me sort of pivot in various ways. And that pivoting was necessary because every day was a crisis. So that's how, I mean, and when I came back in November and had that meeting with my committee, and they asked, okay, so do you want to change your dissertation now? And that was when I was like, okay, I do think I know a lot more now, so I think I can. So it was not during my fieldwork that I changed it. It was like post that, and continued to do my interviews post that. So that was how it went.
Thank you, Taru. I wonder if Leon wants to pose a question.
Yes, actually, thanks for the opportunity. I would like to ask a question to Tatiana, because in your work, I think something was exposed that also showed in Gala and my research, which were just the very ignorant and authoritarian responses to the pandemic. So besides the fact that I'm really happy that you decided to stay in academia for now, I was also wondering what you think our role as a researcher can be in challenging these ideologies, and especially what your sentiments and experiences are and were with that in a time during COVID where communication was so difficult.
That's really tough. I mean, what's your position there, right? I really felt, well, when I read Gala's experience about this guy that she interviewed and he took off the mask, I had the same experience a couple of weeks ago with another interview, and I was wondering, should I say something? I'm not vaccinated. And I don't know if he is, and I don't know if he's tested, and I should say something. I didn't in the end, but I'm not sure if I just can't say if the next time I will. But in a broader sense, do we oppose these tendencies, or do we just research them? Do we just observe them and say nothing? That's such a tough question. On the one hand, I feel like you need to observe them, you need to describe them with an honest mind, and saying, not being too overly critical in the way that you have your empirical work, but also to document what's happening and to let others decide for themselves. But then there's this other position saying, this is bullshit. Why don't you believe in COVID? What else do you need? So probably I'm more outspoken, and I think you are too, Leon, when I'm with my family and friends and people on the buses and things like that. But in an interview situation, I want to hear these things. I want to create a space where they feel comfortable saying what they feel. And I wonder if or my position, if it's the political position I held. You know, you said it yourself in the essay, I think, that you need to let people speak before and then analyze what's happening, but first you need to speak. So I really loved the way you described how to reach out to people that are hard to find, and I think it's a good way of going out and collecting and hearing people and voices that we don't hear in our bubbles, in our networks.
Thank you to both of you. I think that Ali has a question that builds on this.
Yeah, I wanted to follow up and ask Leon and Gala a question. In your essays, I really enjoyed how you spoke about being empathetic but not complicit in some of the COVID denying behaviors that your participants were engaging in, and not just in what they were saying, but like what they were doing with having to, Gala, you mentioned having to resist shaking the participant's hand when he puts it out. And I just wanted to ask, how do you manage that? Because you write about it very academically, and that you compartmentalize it as empathetic but not complicit. But how do you do it from like a personal level? How do you manage those conflicts and not get overly despondent and depressed when you're dealing with people who I assume have quite radically different views to both of you. Yeah, that was just something I was interested in hearing about.
Yeah, maybe I go first, and is that okay, Leon? Thank you. Yeah, thanks for the question, Ali. That's definitely, that's an issue I ask myself every day. That's kind of been accompanying my research ever since I entered the field. And I guess the sort of compartmentalization that you noticed in the essay is probably exactly my way of dealing with it, of not having too much of a sort of emotional involvement with some of these situations anyway. And I think my position towards, or my positionality towards interacting with far-right sympathizers or far-right activists in the field has definitely changed as well. I remember starting fieldwork and starting interviews and being very inspired by Hochschild's Strangers in Their Own Land. She talks about this idea of the empathy wall and the sort of importance of sort of reaching across this wall and trying to really, without being too critical, as Tatjana just said, trying to just understand a person's sort of like subjective worldviews. And that was sort of my initial idea of kind of trying to keep my own political views aside, but confronted in situations where, there was immediate harm kind of to expect from, when infections were higher and so on, from this like very bodily experience of like shaking a hand, or like mundane experience as well, no, of shaking a hand or not wearing a mask. My position shifted, and that I felt it more and more important to kind of to resist even in these small everyday negotiations. And if I get depressed or not, I think what really, really helps is to first say, this is my PhD is my work, and like that's my way of coping with it. But then two, also to just have an exchange and an honest exchange with other peers and friends who might be going through similar processes. And in that context, sorry, just this last sentence, it was so helpful to have this like exchange in writing with Leon as well. I wanted to mention that as part of the Spotlight On series, that really sort of allowed for a reflection on these situations.
Yeah, just briefly to add to this, I can very much echo the last part of just talking to people about it and reflecting it. But I think my brief answer to your question would be, it's really difficult. And it's like, what was important for me was to realize that there's not like right and wrong, but I imagine it more like a compass, and that depending on what kind of situation you're on, you will shift a bit more to one or the other side. And for example, I realized that for me, it's really different doing outdoor ethnography again than, for example, in a phone interview, because when I'm outside and there's other people around, and I know that like people, I don't know, saying or acting in incredibly racist manners can actually harm people who are around, I know that I will be more likely, and I have been more likely, to kind of step outside of the researcher role and intervene. Whereas when I'm in a phone conversation, of course, this person could harm somebody later on, but I'm more prone to just listen and take it in and analyze it, and then intervene like a step later with my writing. So I think it's maybe, yeah, it's very difficult, and it definitely helps to reflect with others.
Wow, that was very insightful and helpful. I liked that distinction you drew, Leon. I have a question for Angana, but it really kind of draws on a contrast that I saw between your essay, Angana, and Sarah's. Sarah's essay emphasized sort of this stubbornness, this desire to engage in your research question, and your sort of persistence. And your essay, Angana, struck me as really engaging with the theme of letting go. letting go of your research questions when you have to, when your constraints are so great that you just have to switch research methods. And there's, you don't have a choice about that. That's just something you know that you have to do. And I wonder if you could speak a little bit about that, Angana, about your decision to let go of the fieldwork component when you had the, when it became clear to you that, it just wasn't going to be possible.
Okay, so for me, when I just came back a week before the lockdown imposed. So there more than 2.5 months, I collected some sort of data. So I have some sort of sense what I have collected and how, and I need that much of time to write it down, to thematize, and then make it more sharp. But for me, I can't take stubborn decision like Sarah, as she do not have a child to carry over in a dense kind of a field, so that there a huge chance of infection is there within the congested mill colonies. So I was unable to do that, and the interstate restriction of traveling also not allowed me. In between, it was allowed, but I was unable to go there. At that time, Mumbai was its peak situation, and when again I thought of going back, then Kolkata and West Bengal have its peak situation. So in my hometown, my parents and other relatives are also positive, so it was not possible for me to go back and stay there. So for me, I don't think that it should let it go like kind of thing, because I had something in my hand, so that I am working on brushing up. And apart from that, I have not changed my methodology totally. I have said that I have used the digital ethnography interviews and the e-newspaper kind of things. I will use them as a tool, because I think digital ethnography cannot like replaced with the total ethnographic essence what we get from the field. So yeah, I took it like that way. And I believe soon we will be back to our field, because now in Mumbai, considering the situation is quite okay compared to West Bengal, and I believe I will go back and do my fieldwork, because I think I have structurized my portions of research to in a better way. Now just I will have to go collect the data, and now I can go back to my other kind of aspects which I have to do. So I have planned it like that way. So yeah.
Thank you, Angana. So we have about 15 minutes left, and I want to turn some attention to the audience questions. There have been some excellent and rich questions posted in the Q&A. And one question in particular that I think is most directly perhaps targeted to Francesca and Ali, perhaps, Adiba Ansari's question about fieldwork that one can't do via technology. While many of you were able to have phone conversations or Zoom conversations, several of you were working in communities where that just wasn't possible, and the only way to collect data is through face-to-face work. And I wonder if, Francesca, if you would respond to Adiba's question.
Yeah, thank you, Adiba, for your question. Actually, I was surprised when I read Ali and Sarah's essay, because in some way I really like their idea of slow down and moving at the speed of trust, which is maybe something I didn't do and I couldn't do because of my the time was running, my scholarship is ending, my time in Argentina had a limit, so I kind of have to rush. And I felt really guilty about going to the field and expose the inhabitants to a risk. So in some way, I've try to select the people to interview in a selected way, to avoid making a lot of interviews, but just reducing them. And I noticed something which is interesting, is that I thought I was disturbing, or I mean, I thought like creating problems to them with my interviews. But at the same time, I noticed that they needed to speak and they needed to express their situation. And they really wanted their story to be told in a different way. So maybe that's something I didn't expect, and I found in the field. So that's it.
Thank you for that, Francesca. Taru, I know you had a question, and it seems to piggyback in many ways on one of the questions posed by Julin Wang. If you could say, yeah, please ask your question. I like the way that you're phrasing it.
I just wanted to ask to all the panelists here, how do you feel that your institutions and the general research community has responded to help PhD students to maneuver this continued precarity? And what were the instances that sort of like stood out to you across the last year or so? Thanks.
Yeah, I would love to, just to piggyback on that a little bit. How have your institutions supported you or failed to? And I'm partly curious about this, thinking about another institutional and professional role that I play as a department chair in a department that has a PhD program. What did your institutions do? What could you have preferred your institutions to do to support you in this time? Sort of open out there for anyone to chime in on.
I think I'll just start. So here the debate was a lot about, we have these 3 groups of PhD students, right? So there's the ones that are fully funded for the dissertation. Then there are the ones that have third-party funding, the projects, research projects. And then the third ones that have no funding at all, or they are not within the department. And so what happened was that, sure, as the pandemic continued and the lockdowns continued, everybody knew that research could not be conducted, or it was postponed and prolonged and whatever. So some contracts from the first group, the ones that are employed for their dissertation or are within a professor chair. It's a strange system. I think Gala and Leon might know how this works. It's similar to Germany. So the university prolonged their contract, but you had to apply, and it's only for half a year. But it's not nothing. For the second group, the ones that were funded from outside parties, they did nothing. They said, it's none of our business. You have to take it up with the funding party. And this was going on a long time. And now they are more or less convinced, okay, we can't do that because it's so long and people were not able to research. So they are trying to find some middle ground and to prolong some things, but I'm not up to date on that. And the third group, nobody did nothing for them. They couldn't go to the libraries. You couldn't, you got some digital software you could apply for, but it wasn't a lot of help. Students' representatives, they try to chime in and they try to take back some of the worst, but it's like, I don't know if you know this phrase, like pouring some drops of water onto a hot stone. Nothing. Yeah, it's something, but it's not really doing the trick. So yeah, it was dividing the PhD student groups even further here. Yeah.
Thank you for that, Tatiana. We actually, the panelists received a communication from Safa, who's currently doing field work, but is the 10th author in this group. And she thanked Tatiana for raising that issue and identified herself in what would be the third group in her own PhD program. And I think that, yeah, this raises a really important issue about inequality among PhD students as well as other, in addition to other inequalities. Sarah?
Yes, thank you. I'd like to actually continue on what Tatiana has been talking on from with my perspective from University of Belgrade as let's say I have a situation that's characteristic for the system here that some of our participants might also share. There is also, like in Serbia, there is no, like the concept of PhD funding from your institution. I am a PhD student of Faculty of Philosophy, University of Belgrade. And I don't know how to put that nicely, but they didn't give a shit. So there was no protocol about, is it allowed to do your field work? Can you do it? Or can you use something else? Can you, I don't know, what's happening with your tuition fee? Can you, I don't know, split it? It's in some smaller portions because you will definitely need to prolong the course of your studies. The faculty members were completely ignorant, and I'm very understanding that they're not only our professors, but humans too, that have their own fears, problems. They are also witnessing and experiencing this pandemic, and I couldn't expect from them, of course, to just focus completely on their students and do a lot of work around us, but they didn't send a single email, which I found very disappointing. But on the other hand, how the system works here, most, or let's see, a lot of the PhD students are full-time employed in some other research institutes or elsewhere. So the institution where I work, which is Institute for Philosophy and Social Theory, was much more adapted to the crisis situation, even though belonging the same university. And that is the place where I found support from my peers. That's a small institution for like around 50 something researchers, most of whom are young career researchers who were very supportive of each other. There was much of collegiality and solidarity, who shared their tactics. Some of them were conducting their research in previous years of different crises that occurred in this region, let's say. So they had something valuable to share to us, and they had, let's say, good advices. One of those advice were to just, that we should, as you asked, Angana, that she let go of her research question in order to actually care for her family and so on. And much of the, especially female colleagues, were very supportive, and they just advised us, the PhD students who work there full-time, not only on our PhD, but the different research projects at the same time. Most of those research projects had nothing to do with our research topic. And they just supported us to let go of everything and to take time, because that was the least they could do as colleagues, and as friends. And that really encouraged me to actually find a way to actually let go of control and of my, I don't know, habit of control freaking.
Thank you, Sarah. Leon?
Yeah, I just quickly wanted to add something to this, because in my case, I felt like there was a very big difference between like individual support from my supervisors, which was great. Like they were there the first day that, I don't know, the pandemic became like a thing, and they were always supportive and told me, okay, this is a situation of exception, so you can pretty much do anything and we'll support you. And then the institutional situation where I felt just everybody was overwhelmed. And for my case, it kind of worked to muddle through with my supervisors and maybe do some things a bit more informally than they intended to. But what I also experienced was that PhD students that started during the pandemic, especially international ones, as I'm doing a PhD in the UK, were really lost because they got different instructions every day on whether they should travel to the country, were allowed to the country, or even had to travel to the country to be able to do their PhD in a situation of lockdown and pandemic. And this led to like really severe situations for some of them. So I think just like, I don't know, it exposes how difficult it is to keep everyone's situation in mind in a situation where reality kind of changes every day, and in the end you have people sitting in all these offices and trying to make decisions, and yeah.
That's very useful. So I have the unenviable task of having to end this conversation, and it is with regret that I leave questions in the Q&A and questions on people's minds, but it just underscores the importance of creating more forums like this and expanding opportunities to sort of make the hidden more transparent, and to bring these types of conversations into and alongside our conversations of our academic work, to make this visible. So I would like to thank Eshna Badrizaman for organizing all of the technology and keeping us remarkably well organized throughout this whole process that began earlier on with the composition of the essays, as well as this Zoom webinar. But I would also like to invite the audience members to spread the word. We will be posting the video of this discussion onto the IJR website and onto the IJR Facebook page, and there will be the opportunity to revisit this conversation and hopefully use it as a platform for further conversations. So thank you. Bye-bye, everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye.